going on, everybody? Kevin Cole here, Friday afternoon, post a wet and offensively disappointing Thursday night football with playoff implications, though. And we'll discuss some of that. We'll discuss Thursday night. We'll discuss the future of the 49ers, probably a little bit more interesting than the future of the Rams. I don't know. Maybe the Rams can make some noise. We'll have to see what Rams Twitter is saying. Rams Twitter actually exists. I'm not sure if Chargers Twitter exists, other than a couple of Justin Herbert stands that I've seen out there. So we'll talk through some of that. I want to talk through a little bit about the Bill Belichick stuff, just because, I don't know, whatever. I got some takes on it. It's not that important, though. We can talk about that. And then I'm going to let you guys drive the discussion a bit with the questions. I'll answer anything that you have to ask about, I don't know, the games from last week, the performances so far this season, what we're looking for this weekend, and so on and so forth. All that sort of important stuff. So let's start by looking back at last night a bit, and then the larger implications of what happened last night on the rest of the NFL season. Of course, go check out unexpectedpoints.com for everything. I'll dig into some of the Thursday night review here for everyone to check out. Try to find an image most of the time that comports with what's important in this game. So I wanted to get a picture of the Rams defense, since that was kind of the story of this one. The 49ers favored by 3 points. Of course, the final score after 4 different field goals. I'm sorry, not 4. After 6 different field goals, 4 for the Rams, 2 for the 49ers. 12-6 in favor of the Rams. The Rams were seen as being the better team, definitely by my numbers, just by not being awful offensively. The 49ers were awful offensively. The Rams were just bad. Now, these aren't adjusted numbers for weather and things like that, and we saw the rain in the first half, so we don't need to get into that too much. But just from a pure standpoint, and let's just ignore, at least now, put in the back of our mind, the weather for now in this game. The 49ers were, like a bottom 10th percentile type of outcome. And the Rams in success rate were actually kind of mid-tier, and then about the 25th percentile in EPA efficiency. What's weird about that is that the Rams were worse by EPA efficiency than they were by success rate. If you look at the relative number there, and that's without turning the ball over. So with no turnovers. So normally those are like the real anchors on EPA that can make it much lower than what you would expect based upon success rate. Or, you're expecting maybe 1 turnover during the course of a game, 1.5, depending upon how many plays that you have during a game. So they got 0 turnovers. They got almost a 40% success rate, which is okay. But still only 25th percentile efficiency, which just shows the very, very much lack of upside that both of these teams had offensively. And in a weird way, the final score, because of the lack of turnovers, only 1 turnover total in the game, all 6 field goals were made, right? No missed field goals. In a way, the final score was not that much out of whack in terms of there being more points that should have been scored that, due to some sort of poor luck, weren't scored. Each team had 11 drives. They only had 25 first downs for the 22 offensive drives that they had in this. A combined 7 of 27 on third down. So that was maybe in the luck equation. If you're going to throw what's in the luck equation, both teams were just not good on third and I think the 49ers converted a fourth down. We're not good on third down, and then the 49ers, they got their fourth down conversion, but it didn't end up being enough on this one. 3.6 yards per play for the 49ers. Yikes. 49ers never got in the red zone. Rams got there 3 times, came away with 3 field goals. So in that way, yeah, they could have scored some more points than what we saw in that. I think the big talking points during and coming out of the game are going to revolve around Brock Purdy, and perhaps maybe even looking forward to what the 49ers should do next offseason. Purdy will have completed his 3rd year in the NFL after this season, which means the window opens on negotiating his contract, his potential extension going forward. Before I get into all that, and I am going to get into some of that, I want to just say this is a weird game, but maybe not so atypical of what we've seen from Purdy this season. It was bad. The only worst game he's had by EPA per play, by efficiency, by total EPA loss was against the Packers earlier this year. It's only the 6th game of his 40 games where he's had at least 20 dropbacks. It's only the 6th time that he's had negative EPA. Now, 4 of those 6 games have come this season. So, that's something to start to pay attention to. It's happening a little bit more often now. So this is going to add some doubts to people that he's worthy of that franchise quarterback type of contract, where, let's face it, he's not going to be thrown into the Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield mid-tier of quarterback contracts, guys who were basically left for dead by their first teams, found success somewhere else, showed they could be starting but not necessarily elite quarterbacks, and then got a deal, right? Lack of upside, basically, like starting quarterback with lack of upside contract. He's probably going to get something more than that. He hasn't gone through that whole evolution that same way. People would try to peg him in there. We'll see. Even Daniel Jones was able to get a little bit higher tier of a contract, not the top tier contracts, but just based upon one good season, his 4th season in the NFL, Daniel Jones was able to get a better contract than that mid tier, which was, it's going to end up costing, that contract is going to end up having cost the Giants about $80 million over 2 seasons for Daniel Jones. Presuming he's gone this offseason, which is pretty much a guarantee at this point. So Purdy's going to get that top $60 million a year contract. So the talk is going to be about him this year. And what I wanted to illustrate, and of course, the best place to illustrate a nuanced topic is on Twitter, right? We all know that. That's the best place you can go to try to get a nuanced take. Is what I like to do is I like to say, okay, and this comes into play from what we saw last week when I was talking about the Eagles, the Broncos, and the Seahawks, where you look at those 3 teams where the offensive performances haven't really changed from an EPA per play standpoint, yet the perceptions have shifted around a lot because their respective defenses have gotten a lot better, and then the results have gotten a lot better, right? So there's some element of this going on with the 49ers. It's a little bit different, though, because with the 49ers and with Brock Purdy, it's not that the offensive performance is the same and the defensive performance has gotten worse. So therefore, the perception is wrong. It's not quite that, right? It's that the offensive performance has gotten worse, but it's still not awful. It's just going from having been 6th best in the NFL in 2021, and I'm talking about on EPA per play, 6th best 2021, 4th best 2022, numero uno in 2023. And now, after this awful performance last night, remember, this is included in the numbers, now stepping back to 11th this season. Pretty similar drop passing and running the ball. So last year was a clean sweep. 1st in offensive EPA overall, 1st in passing EPA per drop back, I'll say. Scrambles are included in there. And then 1st in EPA on designed runs last season. Clean sweep. This season, 11th, 12th, and 12th. So almost consistency there too. Almost a proportional drop back by all of those different measures. Now, in yards per play, they actually don't look that bad, as bad. If we're going for yards per play, and this could be interesting because it helps us, filter out some of the outlier types of things. Probably don't want to filter out sacks as much as we do interceptions and fumble recoveries and things like that. So in yards per play, they're actually fourth this year, the 49ers. Baltimore's number one. Detroit's number two. Detroit's in a virtual tie, actually, with Green Bay for number two. And then the 49ers are next, above the Bucks, above the Bills, above the Commanders, above the Eagles, above the Bengals, above the Cardinals to wrap out the top 10. So if they're doing really well or they're doing relatively better in yards per play versus EPA per play, then the solution, what they're doing poor in, why there's a disconnect there, is going to come down to some of the things that I like to adjust out of the adjusted numbers. And that's why the 49ers look a little bit better in my adjusted numbers in my team rankings than they do for others. And those things are turnovers. It's going to be a huge one. So interceptions, fumble recovery, luck, those sorts of things. And late down conversions. And special teams, doesn't really fall into this category because I'm only looking at offense. Because special teams can affect the win-loss, but won't affect the offense. So it's really going to be late down conversions and turnovers. So they're a little bit worse at those things. Now, does that mean like fundamentally they were lucky before when it came to turnovers and late down conversions, and now they're just regressing more to the mean? I mean, there's some element of that perhaps, but probably they're getting a little bit unlucky. So probably the 49ers are still functioning close to where you would need to get to for a top 5 offense, probably more in the like 6 to 10 range offensively this year. So the reason I like to start with that is just because before if we're like a lot of people, they build their player specific cases. Lots of people, they do two different things. They complain about team stats, these stats being team stats, but then their perceptions for the team is even wrong, right? And this is part of like what I talked about last year when it came to Lamar Jackson. Before Lamar, got hot at the end of the season, so the case became a little bit more muddled. But before that point in time, and when people make these points again about the Eagles and the Seahawks and Denver this year, they would say, before you even get to the player arguments, like before you get into the Bo Nix argument or the Geno Smith argument for how well they're playing, especially Bo Nix argument, they would say, well, the offense has gotten a lot better. So that's my first argument for Bo Nix being good. And that would be the first argument, perhaps, that Brock Purdy is playing really, really poorly this season is, well, the offense is bad, right? Like the 49ers just have a bad offense this year. So I put up, the EPA per play numbers, and I even put up the EPA per play numbers on Twitter, specifically saying, I didn't say this quarterback's EPA per play, because people like to, like to get all in a tiff about that. This quarterback's EPA per play, I didn't say that. It's a team stat, right? So I tried to lean into you guys who want to say EPA is a team stat, EPA is a team stat. Okay, I'm going to give you EPA as a team stat, but we can still at least look at the plays, the team stat on the plays where the quarterbacks are involved. So just pointing out for perception, this is where we want to start our analysis, is saying, okay, we look at, I say here, 49ers offense on Purdy dropbacks and quarterback runs are only averaging 0.02 less EPA per play. I'm going to say less there, not fewer, because it's, fewer less is kind of a pet peeve of mine. People using that incorrectly. It's less here because you could say fewer. I don't know. This is a complicated one, but I'm going to go with less. EPA per play than the Bengals on Joe Burrow dropbacks and quarterback runs, ranked 7th and 8th respectively among quarterbacks. Again, we got to just start with what the perception is. So if your perception is, let's forget about quarterbacks, right? I think if you asked people and you said, okay, the 49ers passing game, dropback passing game versus the Bengals dropback passing game, which one has been more productive this year? I'm gonna be like, oh my God, of course, the Bengals. Like everyone's talking about Joe Burrow should be MVP potentially if they had a good defense and blah, blah, blah. Eh, maybe not, I mean, Bengals run a lot more plays, right? They've relied upon their offense a lot more. So in that way, they have higher counting stats because of that. Their defense is so bad, has been so bad that, Burrow and the offense has had to do a lot this year. Let's look at the defensive numbers. Yeah, the Cincinnati's third worst. But, San Francisco's not great defensively, but they're 13th, which is pretty much right in the middle of the NFL. They're not very far away from being out of the top 20 this year. So, no, there's some of the similar elements going on there. So when we put all that together, that we have to have, that's like our perception check. And then if you think about Burrow versus Purdy, again, I'm not saying Purdy's as good as Burrow or anything like that. Can you really make the argument? Can you really make the argument? If you're looking at, and I would rank order these in things we can actually sort out and measure the best versus things we can measure the worst. Can you make the argument that Burrow has had substantially worse just luck on plays? So it would be, good passes, tipped interceptions, not having any dropped interceptions where Purdy has dropped interceptions, fumble recovery luck, things like that. Can we make the argument that he's materially better in that category? He has been a little bit better though in that. That's what I do. Adjusted EPA, right? He has been a little unlucky. He's had some like huge losses on interceptions, pick six, fumble six, things like that really hurt his number. So we can say that. But most people probably wouldn't even think that's the thing, right? Again, the perception would be off. They wouldn't say that's the reason. Number two, surroundings. And I'm going to start player surroundings first because we can measure that a lot better. So can we say that Burrow has that much worse player surroundings offensively, because this is all that really matters going to these numbers, than Brock Purdy this season? Yeah, I don't think so. I think he's probably has better surroundings, potentially, in a way. I mean, I don't know. The offensive line's not great, but I mean, Jamar Chase is like next level type of player, it seems like. T. Higgins is looking like, T. Higgins is going to get a huge contract this coming offseason. And then lastly, we go to coaching, where it's like, yeah, you could still say that Purdy has a coaching advantage. But again, good luck anyone figuring out what the hell's going on with coaching this year, right? And this coaching becomes this, like, you fill in the blank, becomes coaching. A lot of the Purdy haters who are also Shanahan lovers, Shanahan stands amongst the film hipsters, like if your logical equation is 49ers have an elite offense equals Shanahan is elite, that's the reason. Then when 49ers have a good, not elite offense, then it should be Shanahan equals good, but not elite. But nobody's saying that. Everyone's just talking about everyone's talking about Brock Purdy, right? So we at least got to have a foundation there where maybe he's playing a little bit worse than what the numbers are for Purdy. You can kind of make that argument a bit. Yes, things have gotten worse, but they're still not that bad. There's still plenty of ways that they could have been winning this season. And now, at this point, though, with this loss, they're basically done. They have something like a 1% chance if every single game that's played out over this weekend and, the next 3 weeks, if they get the exact results that they need in every single game, they could somehow sneak in to a playoff spot. But it's about at 1% right now. It could be over as soon as this weekend. I think if the Seahawks and the Commanders both win, that would eliminate them from the division title and the wild card, and it's all over. So I actually thought, maybe not over the last couple of weeks, but a few weeks ago, they might get like a Buffalo Bills last season type of run for the rest of the year and have a chance to make it, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. So as we're looking at this now, in the offseason, what do you do? I am less averse than some people are to playing out quarterback contracts. I know some people may point to like what happened with Dak Prescott and say, "Oh, look at, you did the double franchise tag and then you had to give him a cajillion dollars and then now you're in an awful position for renegotiating." But the thing is, like, you do have a lot of other areas on the roster where you can try to ameliorate the obligations that you have going to Dak. The real problem with the Cowboys is not just the Dak contract, but then you're also very, very hot, top heavy in a bunch of other areas. Now, the 49ers have kind of done that to themselves already. If you look at the fact of tough decisions they needed to make, they didn't really do that. They kind of did the all-in thing. They threw the long-term bag at Brandon Ayuk. They threw more bags at Trent Williams. They had already in the past thrown bags at Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey. I mean, they threw a bag at George Kittle, but you can't be mad about that because tight ends are just so freaking cheap. George Kittle, best tight end in the NFL also. These people saying that Brock Bowers is the best tight end in the NFL. No. George Kittle, best tight end in the NFL this season with Kelsey taking a step back. They've already thrown a lot of bags, but just because of that, there is going to be some temptation to now lower the cost of Purdy's contract. Not this coming year, because he'd have a very cheap contract being a 7th round pick this year, but it'll be next year. What would be, he gets a little step up in his 4th year. I mean, he get a little bit cheaper maybe, and really they're beyond that. So I don't know, because Purdy's contract is so cheap and there's no way to lower his cap hit for next year and the year thereafter with an extension, really. I do think that there's some chance that the 49ers do kind of play this out a little bit. And even as a Purdy believer, I wouldn't be against that. I mean, what is really the downside? How much of a big discount are you going to be getting coming off of the heels of all of these tremendously good quarterbacks getting huge deals, off of the heels of Trevor Lawrence also getting a huge deal like that, right? I mean, who else do we have coming up for quarterbacks that you're going to have to be competing against, right? Let's see. Who are the quarterback contracts? Free agency 2025 or 2026. I mean, we got nobody next season. Sam Darnold. So Sam Darnold. Darnold we'll figure out where the Darnold mark is in quarterback contracts. 2026, Aaron Rodgers, RIP. Geno Smith, who will be in his late 30s. Yeah, not a lot else. 2027, Deshaun Watson, yikes. Matthew Stafford, who will be 40 years old. Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield. Okay. And then 2028. Now we got Lamar Jackson. Now we got Kyler. Whatever you think about Kyler. Okay, so that's something. 2029, we got Prescott, Love, Tua, Goff, Jalen Hurts potentially. You got a bunch of guys coming up in that range. Now, of course, and then Burrow and Herbert in 2030 is when those things kind of come due. Now, of course, they can renegotiate these. We can see extensions. We can see that quarterback market get pumped up even earlier than that as they do so. But we're probably in a unique-ish window here where we just went through a whirlwind of big top of the market quarterback contracts get thrown at truly elite players at quarterback, where maybe paying that right this offseason versus waiting for next offseason, waiting for the offseason after that, maybe if you want a franchise tag Purdy for an offseason, might not be that bad. We might not have a ton of movement in these quarterback contracts, especially when we've seen some pretty high profile busts, although maybe Aaron Rodgers doesn't count because he's so old, but somewhat high profile bust when it comes to Deshaun Watson. Maybe Justin Herbert doesn't really turn things around as much as we're thinking that he may end up doing. Something like that is another guy who's getting paid a lot of money to not necessarily do that so well. Maybe Jared Goff starts, getting a little iffy over the next couple of years. It's possible, right? That he won't be doing so well. So he won't look as like great as a comp. Maybe Kyler Murray will just have a great first half of the season every year and then not be good the second half of the season and start to look at like, I'm not sure that money was really necessarily well spent in that sort of way. There is some room for at least the inflation rate of quarterback contracts to slow down a little bit over the next couple of off seasons. So not even to besmirch Brock Purdy and his value, but I might just say market wise, timing the market, which can be very risky. Timing the market, the Dak contract also, that's another one that's not looking so fantastic, right? In hindsight, maybe you can slow roll it over the next couple of off seasons. And I do think with Purdy being the 7th round pick, with there being maybe some questions about his physical talents and abilities, with the fact that maybe he won't demand as much as other guys as far as make a big of an offseason huff about not getting a contract. I don't know. It's possible, right? Maybe you can slow roll this over the next couple of years and then dig your way out of some of these other top heavy contracts that you've given. I mean, like contract like the Bosa contract, it's probably worth it. But again, that's a huge, huge contract that you're giving when you give that to a defensive player on top of the fact that you're paying all your weapons and then maybe having to pay your quarterback also. Sorry, I keep hitting the old cough button over here because my voice is going a little bit more than I thought it was going to. All right, so there's that, and let's talk Belichick a little bit before I get into the Q&A. Here's a good one. I'll just go into one Q&A. This kind of ties directly into what I was going to say. Belichick. So it talks about question from Dr. Tough Guy here. By the way, get on YouTube. If you guys, I got way more podcast listeners than I have YouTube people on here. Get on YouTube and ask some questions on here for anyone listening via podcast. Unexpected points. What do you make of the questionable characters that Belichick surrounds himself with? Joe Judge, Matt Patricia, etc. That was actually part of my Belichick thing. So first off, I want to say that Seth Wickersham wrote this article for ESPN where the headline was, Belichick is giving an FU to the NFL and saying he doesn't want to deal with NFL politics and wants to go to college. Belichick doesn't want to deal with the NFL politics, and those politics are no teams wanting to hire Bill Belichick. That's the politics. That's the NFL politics. If you want to call that politics, that people don't want to hire you. Maybe they don't want to hire a Belichick. I mean, there's a great point made by a friend of the pod, Jason Fitzgerald, where I'll just pull up his tweet here because I thought it's really a good way to think about this. People who are surprised by Belichick not getting a job here. He says, he's surprised by people being surprised. So this is interesting. He says, this is Jason's tweet here. It says, I'm surprised that so many people are shocked that Belichick took a college job. He wants to coach, and I think the NFL avenue was shut to him, not because he can't coach, but because nobody is letting him play GM, and him just coaching isn't realistic. Boom. Nailed it. Jason, once again, nailed it on this one. That's the thing. You can't put the genie back in the bottle or whatever, Pandora's box, or I don't know what analogy I'm coming up with here. But if you hire Bill Belichick, let's remember he was the organization for the Patriots. He actually did a damn good job, I think, at GM at times, being one of the best out there when it came to letting players go. Whereas, I just talked about the 49ers, not so great at letting players go. Baltimore Ravens, always really good at letting players go. When you're just, your downside risk is there if you're re-signing a guy at a top tier contract amount. It's just the way it goes. So Belichick is willing to do that, willing to let some players go. So I don't think he's necessarily bad, but he's probably a little bit behind the times in some regards. And we've seen the head coach as emperor model, as dictator, is the like Bill Parcells, let's say, model that Belichick had also adopted, is kind of dead, right? We have ownership is more invested in pouring a bunch of resources into the front offices. Those resources kind of spread out and they make it a little bit diffuse as far as power is concerned in those front offices. The GMs, people are going younger a lot more on a lot of these different GMs. They maybe comport a bit more with what the next wave of NFL analysis and analytics and all those sorts of things. And they kind of don't really go with Belichick. Now, Belichick had Ernie Adams and guys there that were doing that sort of work. But again, these are dinosaurs. I don't mean that as a pejorative, but I'm just saying, like, literally, like, very from a different era. Guys that Belichick was working with there. So yeah, that GM thing is just not going to work. And this also goes to my next point. When we think about the Seth Wickersham article, when you read a current reported article with unnamed sources, it gives you even a better confirmation or window into the sources of previous work. Now, Seth wrote a whole book about the Patriots. He wrote some articles about it. It was pretty obvious by the articles and the framing and the stories that were told that it was kind of like a very Belichick-friendly article, the way things were framed versus ownership and maybe versus Tom Brady being the other kind of spheres of influence. Now with this article, which paints this whole somewhat absurd idea via unnamed sources that Belichick is the one giving an FU to the NFL rather than the reverse, which is obviously the case. It just lends to the fact of like, oh yeah, that earlier reporting was probably coming from a lot of the same people that we're talking about here that are Belichick's people. And I get the unnamed sources thing. People don't want to put their name on it. So you want to be able to gather information and report it. But at the same point in time, like if you're just saying unnamed sources in the team, that's one thing. It gives the idea that these are potentially unbiased sources, or not unbiased, but at least there's not an obvious bias, where these are really kind of like Bill Belichick biased sources that were probably in those earlier articles and then also in this article. And so the going back originally, what I was talking about here with the Q&A from Dr. Tough Guy here, questionable characters that he surrounds himself with. Yeah, I mean, in this article, it mentioned, not only we've seen the Mike Lombardi thing, right? I think like Mike Lombardi's fantastic for media. I mean, you see he gets a reaction, right? He's very self-assured, which sells well to people, I guess. He's very loyal and pro Belichick, so I guess that's good. But we have Lombardi, we have Patricia, we have Josh McDaniels was another guy named in these articles as being part of kind of the brain trust there. He says Joe Judge. I'm not sure, is Joe Judge part of this brain trust or just a previous brain trust? But yeah, I think the media appearances that Belichick has done, the people he's surrounding himself with, combined together, at least from my perspective, to say, hey, and then you throw in the fact that like he hasn't been successful without Brady. Now, of course, he didn't have great quarterbacks, and there's many reasons for that, but that's something, right? Overall, other than the Matt Castle season and a Mac Jones season, there wasn't really that successful without Brady. You start to piece all this together, and you're like, yeah, maybe this guy should just be like a defensive coordinator somewhere. Would really be his calling. But that was never going to happen. He was never going to do that. He could probably get it. Maybe he could get a defensive coordinator job. Maybe a head coach wouldn't want him because, if they lost week 1, the fan base would already be calling for him to be replaced by the defensive coordinator. But that would probably be more his lane here. So, yeah, I do think there's something when it comes to that he hasn't sounded great. I'm not saying the game is passed and by or something like that, but he hasn't sounded great for me in the media stuff. He's surrounding himself with the people Not a lot of confidence. We're on the cutting edge of anything or great ideas there. We're kind of fighting the last war. You kind of have the brain power and the philosophy and the everything for, it's like if the US Army is getting ready for, was ready for Vietnam before going to the desert, and then was ready for World War II before going to Vietnam, sort of thing. You're kind of fighting the last war type of situation here. And that makes me a little more skeptical of what we'll see for Belichick going forward. All right, let me grab some more of these Q&A and then get out of here, because my voice really does feel like it's going to potentially go here. Well, the follow-up to that is, do you just accept it as a cost of doing business? No, I mean, like, me. Coaches don't matter, right? I mean, don't matter that much. Now, it's a bigger deal in college, but talk about quote unquote politics. And I think you'd have to think that Belichick would have a bigger effect in a non-NIL environment, right? Unless he's going to attract just money through his name, and he'd also attract talent. And then those two things can work hand in hand. I'm not sure. If anything, Belichick was kind of good at not spending money. So we'll see. We'll see. Question from Conad here. Who did it better, Devondre Campbell, Vontae Davis, or Antonio Brown? I mean, Vontae Davis did it best, certainly, when it came to mid-game quitting, because you almost have to respect it, right? He was just like, I suck. I can't do this. I'm old. I suck. Did he ever come back after that? Actually, I should check, because maybe I won't give him as much credit. Was that his last down when he did this for the Bills, right? He was on the Bills, right? Where he just because it was week 1. Maybe I'm totally misremembering this. No, it was. Okay, good. So he came off. He played 5 games in Indianapolis at 29 years old. It was his age 30 season for Buffalo. Week 1, halftime, I believe. He's just like, nope, I'm done. I'm toast. And I think that you almost got to tip the cap to that and just be like, imagine he went through the whole offseason. He did everything else. And now he's just out. He's not collecting those checks for the rest of the season. Remember, you get paid game checks in the NFL. You got to be there for the games. At that point in time, 16 games, 16 checks. I mean, he probably got some signing money in the offseason, but still, not much. 16 checks, and he's just like, forget it. And after getting his body ready, doing everything off season, you're ready to go. I mean, you gotta say he did it best. Antonio Brown, little psychotic breakdown there. Actually, probably not. Who does? Antonio Brown, God, did you see? I don't know. You guys saw the stuff that he was like a big Trump supporter in the offseason. Interesting dude, because actually they had this graphic about like best receivers ever, and Antonio Brown, I think they had it like 6th or something of that nature. Man, I don't know if he was that good, but the dude is a rubber stamp first ballot Hall of Famer, in my opinion, at wide receiver. So that'll be an interesting speech, or an interesting to see people's voting patterns. People had this weird voting thing going on with Terrell Owens. Let's see what it's like with Antonio Brown. How crazy he is if he's still doing the CT ESPN or whatever he has going on his Twitter account. Whoever, I saw some rumor that he sold it to somebody, and it's someone else doing it. I don't know. It looks pretty genuine to me, but who knows? I don't follow him. I did catch up on a bunch of his tweets during the election cycle, because he was part of like Trump's effort before that Steelers game to get people registered to vote. So I was like, hey, I don't know. He's actually building some sort of like fan base in that area. And then Devondre Campbell. I mean, this is just bad luck. This is definitely the worst, I would say, of the 3, because it just showed. I mean, I assume it's an injury concern that he has about not wanting to continue going out there. But man, quitting mid-game in a tough game with a team that was really on the brink of being knocked out, right? Like if they win this game, they still didn't have much of a chance. I mean, let me pull up my own analysis here of where they would be if they had won this game. Because again, they're down to 1% chance. I mean, shit, if they won this game and other things went correctly this weekend, they could have been, close to 20% chance of making the playoffs. at the end of this week. Maybe some injuries happen somewhere. You can get that percent even higher. 1 in 5 chance, 1 in 5 chance things happen all the time, or not all the time, but 1 in 5 times, which is not that infrequent. Yeah, this is bad. This is bad, and he's going to get cut. And the question is just like, does he play somewhere else ever again? Um, I mean, maybe. I don't know. People need coverage backers. All right, next Q&A here from Darius. Should Bears fire Poles too? What's important for them to look for now? I mean, I'm not anti-Poles. I don't know if I'm pro-Poles. I don't know if I have a Poles position. Pun somewhat intended there. I don't think he's necessarily bad from anything that I've seen, but I don't think there's a lot to say that you couldn't improve upon what we've seen. So I think generally he's been fine. I think the critiques that may come, I think in some ways he was a victim of his own success building the team, in that by making that midseason trade for Montez Sweat last year, getting decent performance from getting like top-notch performance from the defense the second half of last year, getting decent offensive performance because of pieces that were built around Justin Fields, getting good results in the second half of last season, that people just kind of like plugged in a quarterback upgrade with Caleb Williams and assumed that anything but a playoff berth with a rookie quarterback was a huge failure this year. Where, yeah, I mean, they're out of the playoffs, so there's no playoff berth for them. They had some chances in some games. They could have won some more games this year. Let me look. See, where are they on offensive EPA per play this season? It's pretty bad, 24th. Versus, where were they last season? So, like, they were 21st. So it hasn't really gotten, I mean, it's actually a little bit better by the straight number, but rank ordering is a little bit worse. So the offense has basically been flat year over year. Gotten a little bit better passing, a little bit worse against the run, but these are very marginal changes. So, like, to get flat performance with a rookie quarterback offensively and just have the defense kind of fall off, which we should have known that defense was going to be very unstable year over year. Yeah, I think like polls in the larger Bears fandom is a kind of a victim a little bit of the Bears fandom getting ahead of themselves. And let's face it, you draft a quarterback, and I'm not saying he made the wrong choice, knowing what he knew at the time of drafting Caleb Williams. But if he would have drafted Jaden Daniels, they're probably going to the playoffs this year. I'm just going to say it. I know people say, oh, no, they're in different circumstances. No one knows. No. If I had to like bet money on going in a time machine, and we can go in a time machine and we can change the card to Jaden Daniels and put it out there and someone else is there, then they're probably going to the playoffs and everyone's happy with Ryan Poles. So should we be mad at him for that reason? Should he get fired for that reason? Are there other circumstances we can really point to that deserve to be fired? I don't think so in this circumstance. If anything, Joe Shane or someone like that with the Giants seems like a more logical guy that should go. Draft record is abysmal. Well, yeah, see, I'm not big on draft record. This is from One Man's Odyssey here. The same GM who has an abysmal track record has a decent one eventually. I mean, what he has done is gotten a ton of picks to help, a rising tide lifts all boats sort of situation. So, yeah, there were some bad ones in there. Velus Jones and some other ones, but so we'll see. Another comment here for One Man's Odyssey. He also hasn't had many first round picks. People forget how bad a state the team was going into his tenure. Yeah, I mean, the thing was about him is he also had to like clear the decks, where you don't see that often with GMs. Normally you can kind of jump in, and no matter how bad the situation is, the cap and everything isn't so bad that you have to spend a whole season just clearing things out, and he had to do that. So Poles has been around for a while now, so you would have liked to have seen more success, but he just got his his number one pick quarterback, and you know, they were close to making the playoffs the year before. So I don't know. I'd give him a little bit more time, but I think he's got to be ready. The only harm I think in keeping him is he might be a little bit wedded to Caleb now, so that you can't look for other options, even hedging a little bit this offseason. I'm not saying you have to draft your first round pick as a quarterback, but maybe thinking about hedging a little bit this offseason, and definitely after the next offseason, if things don't go well, don't make this a situation where you think you got to give him even more time going forward. This is from Kabir, Intellect Sports. I don't know what Intellect Sports is. Shout out there. Random question. How big do you think Purdy's next contract will be? Well, that's the thing is, if he's gonna sign a contract, it's gonna be like a $60 million a year contract. There's not gonna be anything less than that. He's not signing for less than Jared Goff. So I would say don't do it if I'm the 49ers. And again, this is not like a Purdy thing. I'm a Purdy believer. He's a pretty good quarterback, but I don't think you have to rush on this one. Oh, these guys are a lot of people talking to each other here. It says you should look into the Eberflus firing. He was interviewed before Poles was even hired, and then hired day one after Poles was hired. Yeah, I'm not even like an Eberflus hiring. He's saying, okay. I'm not even like a Eberflus was bad guy. I know a lot of people get so frustrated, right? You can't change the talent midseason for the most part. So you're just like, things aren't going well. Coach, I hate the coach. So I don't know. I don't get into that stuff that much. Okay, another thing from Darius here on Q&A. What do you think of the graphs that go around every year if the one-score games were flipped, here would be each team's new record. Can anything relevant be pulled from that? Yeah, I think something relevant can be pulled from that. At the same point in time, once you start to accumulate these things, like in most circumstances, teams that win one-score games were the better teams, right? So we still have to remember that. It's close, right? So you have a stronger ability to roll what are weighted dice in your favor for the most part to win over and over again. So you can get these kind of like outlier 5-0 streaks where you should have been 3-2 most of the time. But the key is you should have been 3-2. The key isn't you should have been 0-5. Most of the time that's the case. Now, sometimes you can get a 5-0 where you should have been 1-4, or you should have been 2-3. And yeah, that can happen, but it's like not all created equal. And plus, like a 1-point victory versus a 6-point victory, or however they're throwing these things in here, there's some big differences there. You have games at the end where teams come and score. So, I would stick with my adjusted score type of stuff versus just flipping the one-score records. But it could be fun, I guess, to do that sort of stuff. You do that to the Chiefs this year, and they have like no wins or something. So, yeah, that can be fun to do. Okay. I don't know if I see a whole lot else here on the Q&A. I've gone about 48 minutes. It sounds pretty good to me. I'll be back at you guys on Tuesday with or without Josh Hermsmeyer. Try to do this again on Friday. Take people's questions. I appreciate you guys tuning in. And hopefully you're enjoying this format here. Again, go to the old unexpectedpoints.com. Free Thursday night review is out. Of course, we'll have I guess we're gonna have Saturday games, right? Coming up in the near future. So we'll have the Saturdays, the Sundays reviews, the Monday night until there's no more Monday night at week 18 there. And then, of course, all the playoff stuff and the power rankings going forward for all the different teams. Appreciate everyone tuning in, and I'll be talking at everyone next week. Thanks so much.